a true crime page podcast featuring Scott Williams Collins.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the True Crime Page podcast. I'm your host, Scott Williams Collier. Today, guys, we've got a very special guest on for you. Our next guest has spent 28 years in the police service in England. Since his retirement, he's become a published author. Some of the books which he's wrote include The Face of Evil, The True Story of Serial Killer Robert Black, and Yorkshire Ripper, The Secret Murders. My next guest is Chris Clark. So what we're going to do, we're going to go for a short break. When we come back, we're going to jump straight into the interview, which I recorded with Chris earlier today. I must apologise, the actual interview does have a slight issue with the audio. There's a bit of a buzz in the middle of the conversation, but you can still hear it. We just had a bit of a technical issue, so apologies about that. We're going to go for a short break. When we come back, we'll have the interview with Chris Clark. Like I said, on the first question, just wanted to know, Chris, what inspired you to become a writer after serving as a police officer for such a long time? What was the motivation in becoming a writer?
Well, basically, I retired in 1994 with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
And at the time, I didn't really want to know anything else, police work-wise.
Yeah.
But my new wife, Jean, she told me around about 2010 of an experience she had when she was a young teenager in a village in Cambridgeshire, and it was basically an abduction attempt. And I realised she was talking about Robert Black, the serial child killer.
Right.
So that inspired me to start looking at Robert Black's early timeline, and I progressed it as far as I could, and then came up against a brick wall. But that's where the inspiration comes from.
Right. Well, tell us a little bit more about Robert Black. What did you find with your painstaking research on Robert Black? How many other abductions and other possible victims did you link him to?
Well, the police research on Robert Black had sort of started in 1978 forward with the abduction of Jeanette Tate. I progressed it from when he moved from Scotland in 1968, the autumn of 1968. He moved to London, and he subsequently had 3 addresses. And the cases I was looking at, as well as Jean's attempt, was the 1969 April murder of April Fabb from Metton in Norfolk.
Right.
The 1973 abduction and supposed murder of Christine Markham from Scunthorpe as well. So they were predominantly the 2 cases that no one had really progressed at all. So I was able to established quite a good timeline of Robert Black from 1968 forward, which connected then to the police investigation from 1978.
Right, okay. Now, after you invested so much time in researching Robert Black, did you pass any of your evidence on to the local police authorities? And if so, how was that met? Did they follow up on anything that you passed on to them? Did they get back to you?
Basically, originally I passed my information on to Devon and Cornwall Police, to their major investigation team, cold case unit, which was accepted very favourably. I tried to do the same with my old force Norfolk with April Fabb's case, and basically met a stone wall. But because of pressure, they reluctantly came up to see me in November 2014 in Crook in County Durham, and I basically told them what they needed to do to try and progress April's case. Right.
Okay. Now, another notorious figure that you've researched and wrote about is Peter Sutcliffe. Now, in your book, you linked Peter Sutcliffe to a possible other 22 victims. How did you go about your research? How do you find all this information and manage to link these crimes?
Basically, in 2012, after the Robert Black case sort of fizzled, I then started looking at a number of unsolved murders that occurred on unaccompanied women throughout the United Kingdom during the 1970s, that all had, to me, very specific similarities to the Yorkshire Ripper series. And on reading Somebody's Husband, Somebody's Son, a book by the late Gordon Byrne, Gordon Byrne was actually able to place Sutcliffe in the locations I was looking at for the unsolved crimes. So it basically married together for the method, motive, and opportunity. So that's basically how I went about it. But all of the research was done through local libraries and the internet.
Excellent. Okay. Now, what I'd like to ask as well, in your book, Yorkshire Ripper, The Secret Murders, you also highlighted the fact that Peter Sutcliffe attacked and murdered men as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about the men that you believe he's to have murdered, their names, and how you connected those crimes?
Yes, in March 1966, a man called Fred Craven was a bookmaker in Bingley. He lived about 100 yards from the Sutcliffe's family, and on this particular Wednesday, he went to his office, which was closed, above an antique shop. And within 10 minutes, he was found murdered, and the contents of his wallet was stolen. The safe was not attacked. It's quite apparent that the intruders were disturbed and left with about £200 from his wallet. Two men were seen looking through the window of the antique shop around the material time. One wore a Donovan cap, which Nick Sutcliffe, Peter Sutcliffe's younger brother, wore. So the local police had him in, but he had an alibi that he was actually collecting fish and chips for the local factory where he worked. But at that time, no one actually looked at Peter Sutcliffe for the crime. And it didn't materialise until 1981, when the investigating officer, Desmond O'Boyle, looked at Fred Craven's case and thought it's got to be connected to Peter Sutcliffe. However, the fingerprints from the scenes of crime had been either lost or destroyed, so he wasn't able to progress the crime. And then later, the following year, in 1967, a taxi driver called John Tomey collected a taxi from Leeds who wanted to be taken over to originally Nelson in Lancashire. And on the journey, the passenger was in the back seat behind the driver. And when John Tomey got lost on a moor near Oxenhope, he put his interior light on to consult his map. And at that time, he was attacked from behind with a hammer by the passenger. He went into unconsciousness, and when he came round, the passenger was at the driver's door trying to open it, and John somehow managed to drive off, and that saved his life.
Absolutely.
So those two cases I directly link to Peter Sutcliffe.
Yeah. I learned about the Fred Craven murder from yourself. I heard about the John Tommy one quite a while ago, and I'm absolutely convinced as well that Peter Sutcliffe was responsible for those murders and that attack on John Tommy. Another question I wanted to ask, Chris. Obviously, the Yorkshire Ripper case was hampered by some major mistakes during Sutcliffe's reign of terror. I just wanted to know, what are your thoughts on how the police handled the case? And do you believe that the police, once Peter Sutcliffe was caught, wanted to hide all the other cases that he was linked to? Do you believe that some of the police officers perhaps even destroyed some evidence so that they couldn't be investigated again?
Well, basically, going back to 1975, the case should have been solved in the first 2 months, because there were 3 attacks in a very small area of West Yorkshire by a man with a hammer. And in fact, the Tracy Brown at Silsden attack was only 4 miles from Keighley, from the Anna Rogolski attack. So if they joined the dots up at that time, the case would have been solved, because they had a very strong eyewitness account from Tracy Brown. However, the operation was bungled from the start, and it's quite clear throughout the investigation there were cases deliberately withheld. And I know of one clearly, Maureen Hogan's case. She was attacked and left for dead in a shop doorway in Bradford in 1976. And she was hit on the back of the head with a hammer and stabbed through her clothing, and then found by a milkman after Sutcliffe had been disturbed. When Maureen Hogan was interviewed in hospital by Dick Holland, he basically wrote it off by saying it was a domestic between her and her husband, because she'd gone out nightclubbing and left her 4 children at home. Quite obscene.
Yeah, it is. That's crazy. I just wanted to ask as well, when you were researching the book on Peter Sutcliffe and writing that book, do you feel like West Yorkshire Police stonewalled you and kind of didn't really want to help you in your investigation into other potential crimes Sutcliffe had committed?
It's quite clear from the outset in October 2013, after sending a Freedom of Information request for Colin Sampson's report and Keith Halliwell's list that he took to Sutcliffe, I had a visit from a senior detective and the head of Freedom of Information, all the way from West Yorkshire to my home address. It's quite clear they were just trying to bluff their way through, so they didn't have to give me the paperwork that I originally requested. Yeah. And it eventually finished up with a refusal to the documents. And there was a subsequent follow-up visit as well. So yes, it's quite clear. And then Operation Painthall, which came out a couple of years ago, was again a bluff to go around the surviving victims, pretending that they were going to try and progress their cases, which again fizzled out for nothing. And there were 4 cases they could have progressed without having to do that. And that was the 2 admitted ones, Tracy Brown and Anne Rooney. And in 2002, they published that if Sutcliffe was ever released, they could charge him with the murder of Deborah Schlesinger and the attack on the Leeds art student, which was Maureen Lee.
Yeah, it seems crazy to me. They should. Why don't they just do it anyway? You know, if he committed those crimes, he deserves to be brought to justice and convicted of them. Right. I wanted to ask another question now. This one's a little bit more personal to me, because these crimes, really notorious, horrible crimes, happened in my hometown of Lee, where I was born. And that was the murder in 1988 of Linda Donaldson, who'd been dumped in the field just outside Lee. She was horribly mutilated and stabbed to death. and she was left naked in a field. And then a couple of years later, in 1991, the murder of another prostitute, Maria Requena, who was chopped up. She was dismembered and put into 5 different bin bags and placed and dumped on Pennington Flash. Now, I know you're writing another book at the moment about the confession killer, Christopher Halliwell, and you believe that he's the prime suspect or a viable suspect in those murders. I just wondered if you could tell me how you connected Chris to those murders, and if he's connected to any other potential murders which may be connected to the East Lancs Ripper case.
In 2016, Halliwell was convicted of Becky Godden Edwards' murder, and at that time I researched everything I could find on the internet, and I connected the East Lancs Ripper series to Christopher Halliwell. In Linda Donaldson's case, she was last seen by the Albert Dock in Liverpool, and she was eventually found at Winwick in Loughton, and it's quite clear she'd been abducted from one force area and dumped in another one, which was indicative of Christopher Halliwell in both his murders of Sian O'Callaghan, who was dumped in South Oxfordshire, and Becky Godden Adams, who was buried in South Gloucestershire. So there you have a cross-border abduction, murder, killer. So that's basically what I looked at. And any cases that were close to waterways, because Halliwell was an avid fisherman and narrowboat enthusiast. So to me, predominantly his leisure time would put him in close proximity to those areas. He was also going around the country as a ground worker and various other professions. And more recently, the case of Julie Finley, which is also connected to those 2 cases, has been raised. The fact that Halliwell was living in Orton, just 6 miles away from where Julie was dumped on the St Helens bypass. So more recently, my theory is starting to come to fruition, and public support is on that side.
Now, during your investigation of Halliwell, is there any other notorious cases that you've linked him to? And I just wanted to know, do you believe that Christopher Halliwell could possibly be the most prolific serial killer in the UK to date?
I'll answer the last question first. 60 items of clothing were found around a pond in Ramsbury in Wiltshire, and 2 of the were identified as a boot from Sian O'Callaghan and a cardigan from Becky Godden Edwards. So it's quite clear 58 other items of clothing. It was Christopher Halliwell's lair where he had these trophies. None of the others have been identified. As far as other murders, there are clusters of murders around the UK. There are 3 in Middlesbrough, and I have connected those to Halliwell. Again, 2 of the bodies have been found from Middlesbrough. One was found 20 miles into North Yorkshire Moor, close to a fishing reservoir. The other one, she was buried and was found 10 years later, just again over the North Yorkshire boundary. So again, indicative of a cross-border offender abducting in one force area and deposition in another.
I just wanted to ask as well, you mentioned the 60 items of clothing. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think the police have ever shown those items of clothing to the public or to possible victims' families. I just wanted to know what your opinion on that is, and what your opinion is of the police in general, how they investigate some of these unsolved old crimes.
Basically, in Wiltshire Police's murder case against Halliwell, it's very similar to the bungled Yorkshire Ripper case with West Yorkshire. Since Steve Fulcher was forced out of his office, there's been no progress made in the 8 interim years since he arrested Christopher Halliwell for 2 murders. Additionally to the items of clothing, they've never been made public, nor have 12 landscape sketches that Steve Fulcher found in Christopher Halliwell's home, again indicative of deposition sites. And again, they've never been made public, and it's only the public who could actually identify where these pencil sketches come from.
It seems absolutely crazy, that, to me. It's something I don't understand, if I'm honest with you. I'm sure many other people, including yourself, think the same. Now, I've just got a few more questions. One of them, which I'm curious about, is: have you ever corresponded with a serial killer? Have you ever, when you've been researching your book, have you ever reached out to them or tried to have or considered doing something like that for your research?
Well, funnily enough, Peter Sutcliffe lives in a cell about 12 miles away from where I'm speaking from, in Franklin Prison in Durham. But no, I would never go down that road unless I was asked by them, because it's a power thing for them. They are stuck in a cell, and the only thing that stimulates them is their appearance in daily newspapers, which clearly is what keeps Sutcliffe going, as to whether he's having turkey or goose for Christmas and just nonsense like that. So no, I would never reach out to them. If I was requested by them to go, then yes, I would. Yeah,
okay. Now, I just wanted to ask one more question, Chris. Obviously, you've spent a long time working as a police officer, and now you write about crime. I just wanted to know, I ask a lot of people this question, actually. What are your views on the sentences given out to people who commit murders? Do you think that the sentences are too soft, or would you like to see something more severe coming back into the country, like the death penalty?
Up to about 2003, there were good standard sentences for murder and rapes. But there's now a table that judges have to adhere to, and this is the problem. The criminal justice system has gone more lenient. So whereas probably in the 1990s you get a 30-year sentence for a murder, it's now looked at and probably viewed as to 18 years, unless there's any additional features like torture and mutilation of the body. So yes, it's becoming more and more lenient, and the death penalty, it's a two-bladed sword for me, because people like Stephen Downing and Andrew Evans and Anthony Steele would have been hung for crimes they didn't commit. So if there was going to be a death penalty, it would have to be for a serial killer who's got a proven killer record. Because it would be awful to have a miscarriage of justice and someone hung as a result of it.
Yeah, I'd have to say I definitely agree with you on the death penalty. I've never been a big fan of it myself, and like you've rightly said, there's been a lot of people over the years who've been executed over here and in America who were innocent. Right, I think that's it for our interview today. Thank you very much for taking the time to come on, Chris. I really appreciate it. I'd love to have you on again in the future, possibly do a show on the East Lancs Ripper and Christopher Halliwell, and we can have another chat if you're up for that.
Yes, I'm very pleased that you've offered me this interview, and yes, I'd be happy to take part again.
Excellent. Just before we go, Chris, do you want to just let the listeners know about where they can find you on the internet, your websites?
I've got a Facebook page which is called Armchair Detective, and I have a website which is www.armchairDetective.org.uk. There's actually a contact page on there, so if anyone wants to ask a question or make some contact, it comes through to my email address. and there are various newspaper articles I've been involved in, and also details of books that are available at present.
Excellent. Okay. Right. Well, what I'll do as well, Chris, and everybody listening, if you want to check out Chris's websites, I'm also going to put the information in the video once it's up on YouTube later. And I'd just like to thank you all for listening today. Please like, subscribe, and share the channel. I really appreciate it. And for now, guys, until next time, have a great time, have a great week ahead, and I'll see you soon.